Makasih ya untuk undangannya. I think I'll just lecture in English if that's okay with everybody. Because I don't know some of the Indonesian terms of architecture words. So thank you for the invitation. Thanks also for everybody to stopping by. I recognize this building, by the way. Whoever made this poster. This is a church by Gaudi in Barcelona, is that right? Yeah. This talk is called 99% Imagination and 1% Reality. And came up with this title because I think we have the opportunities to experience architecture or our built environment in slightly different ways. Instead of looking at buildings or physical forms, I think there are conditions that shapes our built environment. So I hope that this will start to inspire us to look at some of these hidden forces behind buildings. I'll begin with this question. Other than buildings, what do you guys think architecture is?
Bridges.
Bridges. Anybody else?
Monuments.
Monuments? Good.
Life.
Philosophical life.
Life is a good, it's a good description.
It's a way of
Cars. Automobile.
Cukup.
Okay, good. So, I guess we somehow agree that there are more to architecture than just buildings. I'd like to, show some of the alternative descriptions of what I think architecture is. In this case, architecture is a collection of materials that have been put together. In this case, it's probably something that people found on the streets, and in this case, we don't even have architects or designers. In this case of the informal settlement. So it's interesting. We have architecture without architects in this case. Architecture is also, I think, about how local identity or local values or cultures is being expressed. Ceremonies that happen within this local culture. This certainly something specific that comes from a place. And I think that also another description of architecture. And monument. This is architecture as an idea of a marker or a national monument where people from certain nation comes together and have a certain identity in this space. At a much smaller scale, I think architecture is also about the idea of intimacy, gathering space, and also temperature control. So think about winter season where we don't have this perhaps, but we start to heat up the house using an element inside the building. And what about architecture as a series of processes or something that comes from life, lifestyle at a certain place? The fishing boats here, the nets, all these spaces in between the boats, these also create architecture or a sense of place. And last one, I think architecture is also something that could define the notion of time in our daily life. So here is a living room where I think we tend to slow down our day. We take a cup of tea or enjoy entertainment or have a chat with somebody else. And all these elements, the carpets, the couch, they all work together in synthesis to create an architecture. So in a broader sense, I think we could say that materials, culture, identity, focus, activities, and time are all some of the hidden forces behind architecture. And I think it's valid to use this metaphor of architecture as a painting. This is a work by Rembrandt, which had been X-rayed, and what the X-ray revealed here was that this guy here in the middle was painted 3 times over on this side before Rembrandt decided to place him in the middle. Yet when we visit this painting, I think we wouldn't understand why this we wouldn't understand these processes that happened before. So behind buildings, there are hidden layers that we don't see in our encounter with architecture. And one way to encounter that, I think, is by simply walking around in a space or looking at the proportions, looking at certain views that start to define a place where we are more familiar with. Or if it is a new space, maybe we identify them by certain smells that come up from the area around it. And in the end, I think we can understand that most of the spaces that we encountered up to this point have been built according to the idea of human proportion. So one example would be the furniture piece, the chair or the table where you are sitting now. They've all been designed to fit the body. And with that, I think I would like to move on to the next section, where I would like to touch 3 of the many, I think, ideas about architecture. So first one, power and efficient, light, temperature, health, and survival. I'll try to use one main building type or building to show an example of how these ideas have shaped architecture throughout history. So, power efficient. So while I think architecture in some ways have been used to celebrate power. So in this case, I think we could think of this building, for example. This is an unbuilt project in Moscow. This was called the Stalin Monument. It's like a big wedding cake with Stalin's statue on the top to celebrate the values that I think Stalin implanted in USSR at that time. While architecture has been used to celebrate power, architecture has also been used to oppress people using this idea of power within the building. And one that I think exemplifies this aptly is the idea of panopticon here, which was an idea that came from an English philosopher called Jeremy Bentham in the 18th century. And panopticon, I think in a simplest term, is an idea of surveillance, where somebody is watching over somebody else, and that person being watched cannot be looking back at that person. So that's the basic idea of panopticon. And this is a diagram of how we could understand architecture that came from the idea of panopticon, where you have. So here we are looking at a building in the shape of something polygon, where you have a central space in the middle and another peripheral spaces on the periphery where these spaces are the spaces of control or monitor from the middle. So you have that diagram of a building where somebody is like sitting in the middle here watching over the rest of the space. Do you guys get this? I mean, I guess this is in architecture, architectural term, this is called plan drawing, where we cut a building horizontally. So if we think about this space where we're in, cutting it this way is called plan. And this is called section, where we dissect the building vertically with the vertical plane, this is horizontal plane, and this is the elevation. So a more elaborate version of panopticon building was used for many projects in prisons back in the 18th century. This one is in France. And what I think is true about panopticon is that the exterior, in this case, of the prison, and the interior is in a complete contrast. So we could say the panopticon buildings tend to be more introverted. And two other examples of the prisons that have the idea of panopticon. In this case now, the panopticon has grown into a series of corridors, where you have, in this case, the entrance to the prison within this enclosure, and almost like a barracks where the inmates were basically staying in the form of a longer building. But again, the center point is always there. And also there. So this is one where in Illinois, however you pronounce it, which is in the shape of a cylinder. You see here the cell windows of the inmates from the outside, and this is the interior view of that. And what I think is interesting about this is when we relate this to maybe a space where we typically watch a show. So an auditorium like this classroom that we are normally in will have the front and the back, where you have audience and somebody presenting at the front. And what happens here is that there are multiple audiences, but there's only one presenter. And panopticon is actually a reverse of that, where you have one audience here, and then you have, if you think about this conceptually as spaces where performances are happening. So there are probably 1,000 of performances, individual performances that start to happen within each of these cells, and there's only one point where the audience probably sit or watch. And I think what's interesting about this as well is that the idea of vision is also the control of vision, or the power over vision here is established by the use of the spotlights. So the spotlights, when you're under the spotlight, typically you cannot look back. So this is exactly what's happening in this case, where the inmates were never aware of somebody who's watching them or not, because the spotlight were creating a contrast of glare in front of their cell. Another building type, this is not prison, this is called workhouses. Workhouses at that time were the type of building that was established to help the very poor people in Britain. The government would place them here so that they could live. They would have their own quarter. I'll show you in the next slide. And they also work here to generate some sort of income for themselves. So this is in the form of hexagon. This is in the form of a square or a rectangle. And what's true is that in this case, the exterior space now also work as a way of dividing the different genders and ages. So here we have the girls' quarter, boys, men and women. Yeah. But still all carry the same idea of panopticon with one control group individual. another version of a more kind of like bigger panopticon building, and this is super panopticon, where you have like 7 centers now, and all these are cells. And another thing which comes with from that age of panopticon is the idea of punishment within the prison. So in order to keep the prisoners busy, the Victorians introduced a series of like mechanical devices that keep them busy, so that they wouldn't start to do gossiping or talking to each other. So this is a crank or a lever on the wall, which you have to rotate all the time. And you could see them here sitting in like individual booths and keep on cranking, this series of levers. And they thought that they would generate a kind of like some sort of like water, that they pump all the times, or electricity, but it's never that. It's just a form of punishment which keeps them busy. And this is a bit like if you have had a hamster in your house, you have this treadmill where the hamster keeps on running, and that's what they did here back in the 18th century. 19th century. Where the prisoners were told to keep on rolling this wheel to generate some sort of like kinetic energy to move this thing on the top. That's the suction of it. Transfer the energy there, move this thing, something happens. But nothing ever happened. I mean, they never generated any energy. It was a form of punishment. So architecture, as in this case, as a manifestation of the idea of power and oppression, and the way that fission has also played into this. Now, second one, light and temperature. So light, something that is quite abstract. I think we live according to the cycle of life. We wake up in the morning when the sun rises. We go to bed, switching off our light, although some of you might know. And I think light is something that is also giving us kind of like an order of time and season as well. And I think the way that we typically diagram, if I could say a diagram of light, is that so we have the east, the west, north direction, and the south. The sun is, it is given that the sun always rises up on the east. It goes over to the west. When we live on the equator, like in Indonesia, we tend to experience the sun going from the east to west. And the sun somehow tends to be a little bit more vertical. So if you stay inside this building or this space, the sun would just go probably up above you, and it would just the light would just come down like that. But since we live in the northern hemisphere, we experience this in a slightly different way, where this house is now somewhere here. What that means is that we tend to understand, if I make it into a 2D diagram, we tend to, I think, understand that the sun, in this case, comes from the south. It comes from east to the west through the south as well. So the southern side and the northern side then become something that we understand as like two contrasting kind of like faces of buildings, where the north doesn't get the direct sun and the south gets the direct sunlight. And this is a project, I think, that exposes this idea of the contrast between the sun movement. This is a chapel by one of the most famous architects, Le Corbusier. He was Swiss French. This chapel was built on the top of a hill in a small town called Ronchamp in France. And there you see, so this is the chapel. There you see the orientation. So north is there, south, east, and west. And the axis here, as in many Gothic cathedrals, are always placed on the east and west. So we have this chapel. And this chapel is made out of 3 walls: the southern wall, and then the northern east, and then the western wall. And within these curving walls, we will see later on, we have 3 individual chapels here. So this is the building from the southern side. So we are looking at the southern wall. This is one of the towers inside which we have this personal chapel of prayer space. When I saw this in undergrad, I thought this was like a building that was inspired by a duck or a swan or a chicken. Anyway, so from the other side we see the 2 towers where you have, again, the personal spaces inside that. And this is a more detailed view of it in plan again. And what you realize, I think, what we see now here is how thick that southern wall is compared to the other wall. So looking at the, I think, historical photographs, we understand that this building was built not with concrete, but with bricks, and probably plastered over on the top of it, so that we see this as a wide building. I think bricks could be identified as a masonry structure where the idea of thermal mass is really important in this case. So a thermal mass material such as concrete or bricks have an idea of storing thermal energy. So if I have a piece of brick here, and during the daytime when the sun hits on the surfaces, this material will store the heat from the sun, and at night this will release this sun energy back into the building. So the temperature is gradually, the higher temperature gradually moves throughout the day from the outside to the inside. So that's like how it works as a thermal mass. And so we could, I think, understand that this building is also working in that way in a bigger scale, at a kind of like a chapel scale. Another view of this from, I think this is the eastern side. You see how big the building is just by looking at that. And this is something that I always do. When I take pictures of buildings, I would ask somebody to stand next to it so that I know how big that building is. So this is looking at, I think this one is the northern west. And this tower are the towers where the personal chapel are located. So the building has little openings, as you could see, and so I think we could somehow guess that Le Corbusier probably intended that there is a contrast between light and darkness inside. And that's exactly the space that I think we get. This is inside, inside the building, looking towards the east. Um, and so you see this gap between the roof and the wall where the light comes in. And this is where the statue of Mary Magdalene is placed. And the southern wall is the one that I would like to kind of like go into more detail. The southern wall in this case is something that's special because early in the morning it has different light quality to how it is in the afternoon and how at night it starts to, I think, be inferred. The relationship of the light is inferred by the candle that lights up like these blocks of windows up. Here we see it in a more detail. This is an elevation, and you look at how tiny the window is, but how deep the thickness of the wall is. And this wall eventually will be thinner on the top. So here is one of the details of that window. The Corbusier was obsessed by many other art forms, so he designed almost everything around this building, including how the detail of the window is. And this is inside one of the personal chapel. If you remember the towering element, this is the space or the light quality that you get underneath. Certainly something that is really different to the older space that we saw earlier. This is looking up that space. So the light here comes through a slit, just like so the light would come here and then bounce back, and then you see really the color of the wall inside, which in case it is painted red. And I think one way that we could argue about this building is by thinking about how, so if I diagram this building, we have, you remember, the really thick southern wall where all these crazy windows were placed. So this wall would be the wall where the sun would hit the building most of the time. So you can imagine how hot it is inside this building without any form of ventilation. And this towers actually works to ventilate the building by drawing air out from the interior space. So here we see a building as a mechanism to, I think, control light, also temperature, as in to give it a sense of religious space inside this. And on the outside, we see that the southern wall starts to bend, and it blocks the light from entering the space, which is typically used as external office space. Okay, last bit. This is about health and survival. And in this case, I would use my thesis project as an example of how a building could come from an idea of the topics of health and survival. So I started my thesis by having an interest in this open air movement, which came in the 1920s, I think, in Europe, when tuberculosis or TB was quite prevalent, and the belief that time was that getting people out of the city and exposing them to nature, clean air, and enough sun would start to bring these people back into health. So this is a building by Alvar Aalto, a famous Finnish architect who designed Baker House at MIT. This was done in 1925, I think. This is one of the sanatoriums that were built by the Finnish government in the middle of the pine forest. What you see here is series of balcony spaces where the patients would be brought out between 9 o'clock and whenever the sun comes up, and exposing them to the goodness of the nature. So the nature here was thought as an idea of bringing health into the bodies. And one that is, I think, related to that is this idea of the notion of air in architecture. And I was interested in looking at some of these events of smoke or air pollution that happened in many big cities a long time ago. So here we have London, Pittsburgh, New York, where the pollutions, because of the industrial revolutions, started to invade and affect the health of people there. In London alone, I think 4,000 people died in one day when Thames River was filled with smoke. And then this is what we, I think, are seeing in Beijing right now. I hope it doesn't come to Indonesia. The main problem of the smoke here, I'll explain that there is a combination of the gridlock on the highways and also coal burning plants. So one of my friends actually did a study or a research, not on the smoke, but she went to Beijing for 6 months, and she got back here. She told me that she was really concerned about her health. So anyway, she went to check her lung and respiratory system, and luckily she was fine. But I think air or the pollution of air has had some sort of interesting trajectory in our history. So here during the Victorian times, the air pollution was something that defined your social classes. So the workers in this case would live closer to the factories where the smoke came out from, and the Royal Highness would be living far away from that. And during the World War I, I think 1914 perhaps, or 1918, I'm not sure. The first toxic air was created. So this was a case when the German infantry units released pesticides into the battleground in Ypres before they encountered the French. So when the French soldier entered that area, they would already be inhaling these pesticides. So that was arguably one of the very first time when the idea of creating a toxic environment by modifying the air quality was being done. And following the World War, we have urbanizations. In this case, based in Europe, European cities, where automobile vehicles start to become part of the urban system, and so the industrial smoke probably have been tamed a little bit, but the vehicles started to bring smokes into the urban environment again, and so the higher that you live, or the closer you live to the sky, separated by nature, obviously on the ground, the cleaner the air would be. And during the Cold War, in the 60s, we had these speculative projects of design of a defensible system, where in this case it's a series of inflatables. So this is Manhattan, as you can see. So the project by Buckminster Fuller to propose that we build a dome over Manhattan to avoid the nuclear attack or something will clean air become a commodity in the future? This is a scene of the smoke in LA where people started to sell clean air inside the balloon. And the particles in Beijing is known mostly as PM 2.5. It's a particle that is at the size of 1/30th of human scale. So human hair scale, not human scale. So this is, yeah, that's the human hair kind of like diagram. And then, yeah, this is the size of the depth. This is bacteria. This is viruses. And I think it's true that we've been seeing this comparative kind of like images in the media of how these particles invade the urban scale, the city, and starts to erase our reading of the skyline and forces, in this case, people to stay at home. Most of them now stay at home to avoid some sort of like intoxication of this particle. So the smoke is a result of a combination of the particulate matter and also all the pollution that comes from the ozone space. That is a result of combinations of industrial and also vehicular emission. So this is a comparative diagram of how much in the air of China, Beijing, essentially the particles are. WHO, World Health Organization, says this is how much we could breathe, this is how much we could tolerate, and this is how much they are right now. And the government, the Beijing government aims to reduce this by this much in 2017. And this is a diagram looking at how much air conceptually we require every day. So this is how much air we breathe. And so this has, as I said before, this has made the interior space, or kind of like the interior of the building, becoming something that is more important, where people have started to condition the internal space as to avoid, people have started to, I guess, generate cleaner air inside than opening their windows. So the project is proposing that we build a series of urban conditioning systems in the form of power. So more of a map of where Beijing is in China. It's located quite close to the Gobi Desert, which will become also a part of how the gas has invaded China because of the gasification cycle. But this is how much cars have grown on the streets of China. And these headlines are showing how in the last 20 years the highway systems or the ring roads have grown 2 times its original size. This is how the quality of the bad air is first in the winter and in the summertime. So in the winter, since Beijing is a bit like a big bowl, Beijing is worse affected in the winter in the center, and I think versus in the summer, where the bad air cycles out from the city. So here we have 3 kind of like major polluters around Beijing. So the Gobi Desert, which brings gas from the northwest, and the industries which are located or dotted around the ring roads, and then the ring roads themselves, which have the cars stuck in it. And so Beijing had already established back in the Cold War era a series of underground spaces. So one could actually move around the city by staying under the ground. And in this time of an air pollution on the overground, I think one way is like to probably connect this urban conditioning tower to the underground system. So this is the proposal where the subway system and the underground tunnels are become site where this tower is being plugged in. So the tower here is portrayed as kind of like a great event in the Chinese history, where on the suburb people start to see this high scaffolding going up vertically, and it becomes like a great building project in Beijing. This is a diagram of the tower, where it is made out of two main chambers. So the clean air chambers and the dirty air chambers. So the dirty air chambers here is represented in the form of this wide spiraling air ducts, and the clean air chamber is the void inside it, in the middle. So this is showing the two different systems. The clean air chamber that receives the air from the subway air that is being pushed by the train and filtering it up vertically. And around it you have the dirty air chambers that starts to take the polluted air around it and filters it along the way up, and it's releasing it back as a way of creating a cleaner environment around the tower. This is more of a diagram of how they come together, so the clean air chambers and this becoming that. So this is showing how the air is pushed by the subway, it enters the middle, and then the other chambers, on the other hand, will receive air from the outside, and it filters it up all the way. One perspective showing a cutaway of this building. So this is where the clean air moves up. This is where we start to have these folded spaces that takes the dirty air around it. And then there are some sort of public spaces that happen to accommodate people on the top of this folding. This is a more technical drawing. This is the subway line, subway station. And I would like to take you guys from down here up to the top here. So this is a kind of imagination on how the conditioning tower would look like. It's a beacon of hope. It's something that shines, like in the middle of the dust, where you cannot see anything else. It's a marker where you go to, and this space here is a great public space that is connected to the underground spaces, where people start to store their belongings while they are staying here. Moving up to the subway level, we see how the corridors are located next to the train, the subway, and you have a sense of kind of like projections everywhere to create a sense of environment where people feel positive and being reminded of what the future could be in Beijing. Moving up, this is the opening on the ground where the air is pushed up and enters the space. So this is the beginning of the clean air chamber. You see here a series of trays that contain plants that start to also naturally clean up the air. And moving up, eventually you get the bathhouses on the top series of leisure spaces that generates steam to also clean the air on the very top of the building. And above it is the clinic where people are being treated temporarily. And on the top you have the solarium where people enjoy the goodness of the sun and the light that is still there despite of the dust outside. And this is showing off the exhaust of the now clean air that has been processed through the process of filtering the dirty air. This is looking at the middle of it. Up, that's the bathhouses there. This is one section that shows how the dirty air is being filtered, but yet at the same time, when it is cleaner, people could start to feel how the dirty air is inhaled. So this is a form of an air bar, so people start to consume this air. And perhaps, in a dystopic sense, after the Great Smoke had passed away Beijing, you would be left with a series of remains of the towers across the landscape. Something that brings perhaps memory to the old couple that used to live in one place. This is the final model of the project, which Marcia helped me to create as well. And so I think that's the end of it, and I hope that through these kind of like narratives I have probably shown that there is a potential to, I think, to understand built environments or architecture other than just looking at it as buildings. That I think we could develop a sense of sensitivity or critical thinking on the way that we experience space or inhabit space. So, thank you. So I would welcome any response or comments or any questions if there is. It's not something technical, I know, but it's hopefully refreshing.
Komentar aja. Tadi kirain yang Beijing Smoke itu foto yang paling bawah, yang completely dark.
Aduh.
Maksudnya?
Coba slide yang ada Beijing Smoke.
Terakhir.
Oh, terakhir. Oh, okay.
Bukan yang yang Smoke.
Satu lagi.
This one?
Yeah.
No, yang ada Beijing 2013.
Yang di atas kan berarti?
Oh.
Sebelumnya.
Oh, I see. Okay. Anyway, okay, let's just go. So that's in the beginning, isn't it?
Yeah.
Almost there.
Nggak sampai.
Udah nggak usah deh.
This one.
Yeah, I think it's the bottom picture.
Ada 3 gambar tuh.
Oh, yeah. Betul.
But so that clarification question. So how does the building work? Is it filtering the particulate matter?
So there are two. I think there are two systems. So in the diagram, you have a building that is like this, and so you have a building that is like this, and you have series of spaces that start to wrap around it. So in the middle you have the clean air, chamber where the subway air is pushed into it and then being filtered. And these things that wraps around it, the kind of like C-shaped thing is the air duct that filters the air from the outside. So you have a series of openings that starts to take the air in and gradually takes this up. And then at the very last, it releases it back to the system.
So how many buildings would you need to clean Beijing's air at current rate?
That's a technical question.
Yeah. Well, just give a number, like
I
20.
I think if we place, I think if we place it every 1 kilometer, that's how the subway system in Beijing is basically defined. That it's the size of the urban block in Beijing, which is 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. You always have the subway station. I think if we always plug it into each subway station, I think that would work probably in kind of like shorter term. I don't know about this in longer term. But so it's almost like in the World War we read in history this idea of basement, like space underneath your house where you lock up your family and survive. And I think this is exactly that, but this as a response to like the smoke now, not as a response to the war or
Singapore might need it.
Yeah,
Because they have smoke from Indonesia.
We send the seasonal haze from Rio.
Yeah.
So hail.
Hey.
Just a bit, yeah.
So hail.
I hope Indonesia doesn't do that, but I feel it's something that has been happening because of the phase of industrial revolution that comes into that city or that country, and just by burning coals, I think that's another problem of it. So cleaner environment is very important to be kind of like one of the goals of like developing nations such as Indonesia.
Any question?
In Indonesia, I think right now the major concern is not yet smog because it's not sufficiently industrialized as China. But flooding could be a serious issue.
That's true.
Any insight or historical insight about how countries have been dealing with danger of floods?
Well, the Dutch, most of Netherlands were built on a low land. I think we all know this. The answer is no. I don't know anything about this. This is the sea, and I think the Dutch somehow live here. But what they have is a really robust system of dams that kind of like blocks the water. Eventually, the sea level will rise. I think so. One solution would be to build higher, but that would cost way too much, I think. And one solution that I think that has started to develop is a series of floating buildings. So if you think about boats, and if you use the same system of how like a house could float on the water, that's the kind of one solution that has been happening in the Netherlands. So you start to have a series of houses that happily live on the water. When it goes down like that. When it goes up. In terms of how long the house could survive, because there will be corrosions and all this weathering around it, I have no idea. But I think the the main problem in Jakarta, for example, is that we have lots of water channels that are being blocked by the garbage, and so I guess that would be the first step in Indonesia, to clean up these waterways and also preventing people from informally, like settling around, like the dam and taking over the water. But some sort of a floating mechanism might work. Or maybe we just build submarines, and we all live. But yeah, a lot of people in the UK, for example, so if you go to London and walk around the Thames River, you'll see at the end of it there's a kind of like, I think it's called Little Venice because people live there on the water. So they altered their private boats as a way of kind of like making a house on it. They did that purposely because I think they much cheaper in terms of tax. So if the government starts to also alter the tax policy, perhaps people would start to think about creative way of living on the water. I don't know. Just one way of dealing with it, I think. And I think urban parks probably is like the other solution, like to add more. If you think about city as being made out of kind of like asphalt or concrete, these kind of surfaces, they don't absorb water, but when you introduce some sort of green space, the plants start to receive kind of like some of the water. It becomes like a reservoir under the ground. That's probably another thing. And I think the green roof movement has been quite popular because of that. When you build a building, you take away, a potential park space, but by building, like a rooftop kind of like a house or a garden, you start to somehow replace it, but not quite.
Any other question, comment? If not, let's thank Seto once again.
Thank you.